I was 16 when this happened, and even now, 4 years later, I still can't spend more than a few minutes alone in a basement without feeling that same pressure building in my chest. It's strange how fear works. Sometimes it doesn't come from what you actually see. Sometimes it comes from realizing far too late that something was there the entire time, and you never noticed. I grew up in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, in one of those large two-story houses built during the early 2000s housing boom. From the outside, our house looked perfectly ordinary. Brick front, attached two-car garage, small backyard bordered by a wooden privacy fence. Nothing about it stood out. Inside, though, the layout was weird, especially the basement. The previous owners had fully finished it before my parents bought the place. At some point, they'd apparently envisioned it as some kind of entertainment lounge. There was a massive sectional couch facing a mounted TV, a mini fridge in one corner, a built-in bar no one ever used, and two storage rooms tucked at the back behind a short hallway. The basement was enormous, bigger than the entire first floor, or at least it felt that way. Because of that, my parents rarely used it. They preferred watching TV upstairs in the family room. My younger sister hated being down there because she thought it was creepy. So, by default, the basement became mine. I spent most weekends down there, playing video games, watching movies, hanging out with friends, and occasionally sneaking people in when my parents thought I was asleep. That last part is important. There was a side door connecting the basement directly to the garage. Technically, it existed for convenience. You could carry groceries straight downstairs without dragging them through the kitchen. For me, it was the perfect way to bypass my parents. And yes, I know how bad that sounds now. But when you're 16, your brain isn't exactly wired for long-term consequences. This happened during the spring of my junior year, a Friday night. My parents had gone to bed unusually early because they were leaving before sunrise for some charity golf event. My sister was sleeping over at a friend's house, which meant I had the entire basement to myself. Or so I thought. Earlier that week, I'd been texting a girl named Hannah. She was in my chemistry class. Smart, funny, way out of my league. After weeks of awkward conversation, she'd finally agreed to come over. The plan was simple. Wait until my parents are asleep, let her in through the garage, hang out downstairs for a couple hours. Nothing dramatic, nothing reckless. At least, that was the idea. She arrived around 10:30. I slipped into the garage, let her in, and we went downstairs as quietly as possible. Everything felt normal. The basement lights were on, the TV glowed softly against the far wall. The room smelled faintly of laundry detergent because the washer and dryer were tucked behind one of the storage doors. Rocky, our cat, was usually kept in the basement overnight so he wouldn't scratch at my parents' bedroom door. I assumed he was already down there somewhere. That detail would later become very important. At first, the night was going surprisingly well. We sat on opposite ends of the sectional pretending to watch some terrible horror movie while making painfully awkward small talk. Every now and then we'd laugh at how bad the acting was. I was just starting to relax when I heard the first noise. A rustling sound. Soft. Brief. It came from one of the storage rooms at the back. I barely reacted. "Your cat?" Hannah asked. "Yeah," I said immediately. That explanation made perfect sense. Rocky was ridiculously energetic. He knocked things over constantly, climbed shelves, dove into boxes. If anyone was making random noises in a storage room, it was almost certainly him. We kept watching. A few minutes later, another noise, this time louder, a distinct thud, like something falling over. Hannah jumped slightly. I laughed. Trust me, he does this all the time. She looked unconvinced. To reassure her, I called out casually, "Rocky, knock it off." No response. Not unusual. That cat ignored everyone. Another 10 minutes passed. Then came a scratching sound. But it wasn't coming from the storage room. It was coming from the basement door at the top of the stairs, the door leading to the main floor. The sound was unmistakable. Rapid little scrapes. Exactly how Rocky always scratched when he wanted in somewhere. My stomach dropped. Because if Rocky was upstairs scratching to get into the basement, then there had never been down there with us, which meant every sound we'd been hearing for the last half hour had come from something else. I felt every muscle in my body go rigid. Hannah noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer. I was still staring towards the basement stairs, listening. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Definitely Rocky. He meowed, a sharp little impatient sound. Confirmation, he was upstairs, not in the storage room. I opened my mouth to say something. Before I could, Hannah screamed. The sound was so sharp and shattering it nearly stopped my heart. I spun around. She was pointing towards the hallway leading to the storage rooms. At first, I didn't understand what she was seeing. Then, I saw it. A small foam ball rolled slowly out of the darkness, crossing the basement floor, turning once, then stopping directly in front of the sectional. Neither of us moved. I stared at it. That football had been in the far storage room. I knew it because I'd tossed it in there months earlier while cleaning. There was absolutely no way it could have ended up there on its own. Someone had thrown it, which meant someone was standing in that darkness, watching us, and had probably been watching us the entire night. My whole body went cold. I don't remember deciding to move. Instinct took over. I grabbed Hannah's wrist and yanked her off the couch. We sprinted for the stairs. Behind us, something moved, fast. A sudden shuffle of footsteps, heavy enough that it was definitely human. I didn't look back. Neither did she. We hit the basement door hard enough to rattle the frame and practically fell into the upstairs hallway. I slammed the door shut, and at that exact moment, something hit the other side. Not hard enough to break through, just enough to make us both scream. And then, silence. Whatever was down there had stopped, as if it knew we were listening, as if it was waiting. And then, from the other side of the door, we heard 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. The 3 knocks echoed through the hallway like gunshots. For a second, neither Hannah nor I moved. We just stood there, staring at the basement door, both of us frozen in the exact same posture, hands still gripping each other's arms so tightly it hurt. Knock, knock, knock. 3 more. Slow, measured, almost polite. It wasn't the frantic pounding or someone trying to break through. It sounded deliberate, controlled. Like whoever was down there knew exactly what kind of effect those knocks would have. Hannah let out a shaky sob. That snapped me out of it. I grabbed her hand and dragged her toward my parents' bedroom. By then, they were already awake. Her scream, the impact against the basement door, and our frantic footsteps had made sure of that. My dad stepped into the hallway just as we reached the top of the stairs. He looked confused at first. Then he saw our faces. "What happened?" "There's someone downstairs," I gasped. I expected disbelief, questions, maybe anger over sneaking Hannah into the house. Instead, the look on his face changed instantly. Not confusion, recognition. For a split second, genuine fear crossed his expression, and then it was gone, replaced by something colder, more focused. He turned to my mom. "Call 911. She didn't argue, didn't ask for clarification. She just grabbed her phone and stepped back into the bedroom. That should have been my first clue that something wasn't right. My dad moved toward the basement door with surprising calm. He picked up the heavy brass fireplace poker we kept near the living room and gripped it tightly. Then he looked at me. "Take Hannah upstairs. Lock yourselves in your room." "What?" "Now." His tone left no room for argument. Hannah and I bolted upstairs to my bedroom. We locked the door. For several minutes, all we could hear was muffled movement below. Voices, footsteps. At one point, what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor. Then, silence. Complete and total silence. The police arrived maybe 10 minutes later. It felt like an hour. From my bedroom window, I watched patrol car lights flash across neighboring houses. 2 officers entered through the front, another circled toward the garage. They searched the entire basement, then the garage, then the backyard. Nothing. No intruder. No signs of forced entry. No open windows. No damaged locks. Nothing. The officers questioned all of us separately. I told them exactly what happened. The noises, the football, the impact against the door, the knocking. Hannah backed up every word. Still, the officers clearly seemed skeptical. Without physical evidence, there wasn't much they could do. One of them suggested maybe someone had slipped out through the garage before we noticed. But I knew that wasn't possible. After Hannah's scream, I had a direct line of sight to the garage access door the entire time we ran upstairs. No one came through. And after we reached the hallway, my dad had been standing right there. No one could have escaped. The police eventually left. Hannah's parents came to pick her up. She barely spoke before leaving, wouldn't even look at me. I didn't blame her. I was shaking too badly to form complete sentences myself. After everyone was gone, my parents sat me down in the kitchen. That's when things got stranger. My dad insisted there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe Rocky had knocked the football somehow. Maybe fear had distorted what we thought we heard. It was absurd. Even my mom looked unconvinced, but she stayed quiet. I argued hard. I knew what happened. Someone was down there. Eventually, my dad's patience cracked. He slammed his hand against the table so hard it made me jump. Enough. That single word shut everything down. The conversation ended, and for the next week, no one mentioned it again. But I couldn't let it go. Something was wrong, not just with what happened in the basement, with my parents, especially my dad. He became obsessive about locking the basement door. He checked it every night, sometimes twice. I caught him standing outside it more than once, listening, just listening, like he expected to hear something on the other side. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. My parents had gone grocery shopping. I was home alone. I unlocked the basement door and went down. Daylight streamed through the small windows, making everything feel less threatening. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The couch, the TV, the hallway. Normal. Then I reached the back storage room. Something had changed. A large metal shelving unit had been moved several feet from the wall. Behind it was a section of drywall I'd never noticed before. There was a narrow seam running vertically through it, like a concealed door. My pulse quickened. I grabbed the edge and pulled. It swung open. Behind it was a narrow concrete passage descending into darkness, maybe 3 feet wide, barely tall enough to stand in. The smell that drifted out was stale and earthy, like air trapped underground for years. I should have closed it, should have walked away. Instead, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped inside. The passage extended maybe 20 feet before opening into a small hidden room beneath the garage, and someone had been living there. A cot, blankets, empty water bottles, food wrappers, a battery-powered lantern, and taped to the wall, photographs. Dozens of them. All of me. At school, walking home, sitting on the back deck, even one through my bedroom window at night. My stomach lurched. Then I noticed one more thing. A notebook lying open on the cot. Every page was filled with writing, dates, times, observations, descriptions of my routines, what time I got home, what I ate, when I slept. What terrified me most was the final entry, written the night Hannah came over. He brought someone, almost revealed myself, need to be more careful. I dropped the notebook, and that's when I heard movement behind me. A footstep, inside the passage, coming from the direction of the basement. I spun around. My dad was standing there. His expression was unreadable. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed, a tired, defeated sound. "She came back," he said quietly. What? He stepped into the room and told me the truth. Years before I was born,
My Aunt Rebecca had suffered a severe psychotic break after losing her son. She became obsessed with our family, especially with the idea that she should raise me. After repeated threats and escalating behavior, my parents cut contact completely. They believed she'd disappeared. Then, years later, they discovered she'd been secretly living in hidden maintenance spaces beneath our house, watching, waiting. They'd confronted her once before when I was 9. That was the prank they invented. She escaped before police arrived. My parents thought she was gone for good. Until the night Hannah came over. The hidden room was hers. She had returned months earlier, and my father had known. He'd found signs, but said nothing because he'd been trying to handle it himself. That same night, police searched the property again. This time, they found an exit tunnel leading into storm drains beyond the neighborhood. She was gone, vanished. They never caught her. My parents sold the house 3 months later. We moved states, started over. I'm 20 now. I haven't spoken to my father in almost a year. Part of me still resents what he kept hidden. But the worst part? Last month, I got a plain envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed my current apartment building, taken from across the street. And on the back, in neat, familiar handwriting, were 6 words. You shouldn't have opened the door.
I was 9 years old when I saw her standing in the dark. For years, my parents told me it had been a prank, a stupid joke played by one of my mother's old friends. Something harmless that I'd overreacted to because I was a kid with an overactive imagination. And for a long time, I believed them. At least, I wanted to, because the alternative was far worse. The alternative was that what I saw that night was real. And if it was real, then it meant my parents had spent most of my life lying to me about something they were desperate to keep buried. Even now, 23 years later, I still don't know the full truth. I only know enough to understand that some questions should never have answers. Back then, we lived in a large colonial-style house just outside Burlington, Vermont. It sat at the edge of a heavily wooded neighborhood where every house looked old enough to have history attached to it. Ours had been built in the late 1940s. My father loved that fact. He liked telling people the house had character. What he meant was that it had problems. The floors creaked no matter where you stepped, the pipes groaned every winter, and the basement always smelled faintly of mildew no matter how many dehumidifiers my parents bought. I hated that basement. Not because anything had ever happened there, at least not then. I hated it because of the laundry room. The basement itself was divided into 2 sections. The finished half had old carpeting, a faded plaid couch, and a bulky television where I spent most weekends playing video games. The unfinished half was separated by a heavy wooden door. That's where the furnace, water heater, and laundry machines were. There were no windows, no natural light, just a single exposed bulb hanging from the ceiling. When the light was off, the room became absolutely black. Not dim, not shadowy, pure, total darkness, even during the day. As a kid, I was convinced something lived in that darkness, that if I ever stood too close to the doorway, something pale and thin would reach out and grab me. Of course, I never admitted that to anyone. I was 9, not 5. 9-year-olds weren't supposed to be scared of imaginary monsters. Still, I avoided that room whenever possible. This happened on a Saturday in October. I remember because it was cold enough that my mother had started lighting the cinnamon candles she loved, and because my father had spent the afternoon raking leaves into massive piles across the backyard. That night, my parents let me stay up late. I'd been obsessed with this old PlayStation driving game and was determined to beat it. The basement television was the only one I was allowed to monopolize for hours at a time, so downstairs I went. Around 11:30, my parents came down to check on me. My dad reminded me not to stay up too late. My mom kissed the top of my head and told me not to forget to turn everything off when I was done. Then they went upstairs to watch some movie. I could hear the muffled sound of their television through the floor. That comforted me. As long as they were awake, the basement didn't feel so isolated. I played for another hour, maybe more. Time moves strangely when you're a kid absorbed in a game. Eventually, though, I reached a level I couldn't beat. Frustrated, I paused and leaned back into the couch cushions. That's when I heard it, the laundry room door creaking open, slowly. The sound was unmistakable, a drawn-out wooden groan followed by the soft scrape of hinges. I froze. At first, I assumed one of my parents had come downstairs, maybe to switch over a load, but I hadn't heard footsteps on the basement stairs, and after the door opened, there was only silence. Then came the sound, a low moan, soft, drawn out, almost like someone trying to speak through pain. My whole body tensed. The voice sounded female and disturbingly familiar. It sounded like my mother. At first, I actually laughed, nervously, relieved. It had to be her trying to scare me. "Nice try," I called toward the darkness. No response. The moaning stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I stood up from the couch. Part of me already knew something was wrong. My mother wasn't playful. She never pulled pranks, not once in my life. And yet, I started walking towards the laundry room anyway. Because the human brain always wants the comforting explanation, even when it knows better. The doorway stood open. Beyond it was pitch black. No light, no movement, nothing. "Mom?" My voice sounded tiny. I stepped closer. Another foot, another. The darkness ahead felt unnatural somehow, dense, like it had weight. Then I saw the outline, a figure standing perfectly still just inside the room, tall, motionless, facing me. At first, all I could make out was shape, a person-sized shadow against deeper blackness. Then my eyes adjusted slightly, enough to notice details. Long hair hanging down, a thin white nightgown, arms hanging limp at its sides, and its head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Mom?" I said again. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't her. Something about the proportions was wrong. Too tall, too thin. And then it made the sound again, that same low moan, except this time I could hear something underneath it, a wet, rattling noise, like liquid trapped in a throat. The figure took one slow step forward. I screamed. I turned and bolted up the basement stairs faster than I'd ever moved in my life, bursting into the living room so hard I nearly slipped on the hardwood floor. My parents were exactly where they should have been, sitting on the couch, watching television, very much not in the basement. "There's a woman downstairs," I shrieked. They both shot to their feet instantly, and the look on their faces, that's what stayed with me. Not confusion, not disbelief, recognition. Pure, immediate recognition. My father didn't ask a single question. He sprinted for the basement, my mother close behind. And before disappearing down the stairs, she turned back towards me and shouted, "Lock the front door now!" Then they slammed the basement door behind them. And from the other side, a woman began screaming. The scream that came from the basement didn't sound human. Even now, after everything I've heard and experienced since then, I can still say with complete certainty that it was unlike anything I've ever heard before or since. It started as a shrill, piercing shriek. Then it dropped suddenly into this guttural, choking sound, like someone trying to scream underwater. I stood frozen in the living room, staring at the basement door. My mother had told me to lock the front door, but for several seconds I couldn't move. The screaming continued. Then came shouting. My father's voice, angry, demanding. I couldn't make out the words. My mother was yelling too, though hers sounded panicked. Then there was a loud crash from below, like something heavy had been knocked over. That snapped me out of it. I ran to the front door, fumbling with the deadbolt until it clicked into place. Then I backed into the corner of the living room, staring toward the basement stairs. The house felt wrong. The warm, safe home I'd known my entire life suddenly felt unfamiliar, hostile, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The sounds from below continued for what felt like forever. In reality, it was probably less than 2 minutes. A bang, shouting, that awful moaning sound again. Then silence. Absolute silence. The basement door opened. My father emerged first. His face was pale. There was sweat glistening across his forehead despite the cold October air. My mother followed close behind him. She looked shaken in a way I had never seen before. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. Neither of them said anything for several seconds. They just stood there staring at me. Then my father forced a smile. "Well," he said, breathing hard, "looks like your mom's friend pulled off her little joke." Even at 9 years old, I knew he was lying. The tension in his voice gave him away. "What?" He exchanged a quick glance with my mother. She stepped forward, kneeling in front of me. "It was just Debbie," she said softly. "She wanted to scare you, that's all." "Who's Debbie?" "A friend from out of state." That answer came too quickly, practiced, as if she'd already decided it before saying it. I remember looking past her toward the basement door. The darkness beyond it seemed deeper than usual. And I remember noticing something else. The sleeve of my father's flannel shirt had a long tear across the forearm. Beneath it, I could see fresh scratches running down his skin. That should have terrified me more than it did. But I was 9, and when adults give children an explanation, no matter how flimsy, children usually accept it, because the alternative is too frightening to consider. So I nodded, and I let them tuck me into bed. That should have been the end of it. But over the next few years, strange things kept happening. Little things, the kind adults dismiss. Late at night, I'd sometimes hear footsteps in the basement after everyone was asleep. Slow pacing sounds beneath my bedroom floor. Sometimes the laundry room door would be open when no one had been downstairs. Once, when I was 12, I found muddy footprints leading from the basement stairs to the kitchen. My mother insisted my father must have tracked them in after gardening, except it was January. The ground outside was frozen solid. I stopped mentioning these things after a while. Every time I brought them up, my parents became visibly uncomfortable. Eventually, I learned silence was easier. Then, when I was 14, I found the obituary. It happened almost by accident. I'd become obsessed with genealogy websites after a school project about family history. One afternoon, while my parents were out grocery shopping, I used my father's credit card to unlock access to some archived public records. I entered my mother's maiden name. A list of relatives appeared: parents, grandparents, cousins, and one name that made my stomach tighten. Deborah Ann Mercer, born 1962, died 1994. Relationship: sister. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute before clicking. The obituary was brief. It stated that Deborah had passed away at 32 after a prolonged struggle with severe mental illness. No further details, no cause of death, just a funeral home listing and a grainy black and white photograph. The second I saw her face, I knew. Long dark hair, sharp cheekbones, thin frame. Even distorted by age and low resolution, she looked exactly like the woman I'd seen in our laundry room. I waited for my parents to get home. Then I confronted them. I still remember how their expressions changed when I turned the monitor toward them. Shock, then fear, real fear. My father looked at my mother and quietly said, "You need to tell him." She sat down, and for the first time in my life, I saw her hands trembling. Debbie, she explained, had been her older sister. Growing up, Debbie had suffered from severe psychiatric disturbances, violent delusions, paranoia, periods where she believed family members had been replaced by imposters. According to my mother, Debbie had spent years moving between treatment facilities, sometimes stable, sometimes dangerous. There had been incidents, serious ones, but my mother refused to elaborate. She hurt people, was all she would say. When Debbie was released from a long-term psychiatric center in 1994, she disappeared less than a month later. 3 weeks after that, Police found her body in an abandoned hunting cabin 2 counties north. Officially, it was ruled suicide. My parents thought that was the end of it, until the night I saw her. I demanded answers. How was she in the basement if she was dead? Neither of them answered immediately. Finally, my father spoke. She wasn't. The certainty in his voice unsettled me. Then he explained. 3 days before that October night, someone had broken into our house. Nothing was stolen, but the basement window had been forced open. My father repaired it himself and never told anyone. The night I saw Debbie, my parents discovered an intruder in the laundry room. A woman, alive, disheveled, wearing one of my mother's old nightgowns that had gone missing months earlier. According to them, she looked disturbingly similar to Debbie, close enough that in the darkness, a terrified child might mistake one for the other. She escaped through the basement window before police arrived. They never caught her. The explanation should have reassured me. It didn't, because one detail didn't fit. The obituary photo. When I compared it to what I'd seen, it wasn't just similar, it was exact. Same face, same hollow expression, same impossible tilt of the head. Years passed. I moved out, built my own life, and I almost convinced myself my parents told the truth, until last winter. My mother died unexpectedly from a stroke. While helping my father sort through old storage boxes, I found a locked metal cash box hidden beneath basement insulation. Inside were hospital records, police reports, and a handwritten letter from Debbie. The letter was dated October 17, 1994, 3 days after her reported death. The final line read, "Rachel says I can stay below until they're ready for me again." Rachel was my mother. I confronted my father. He looked 20 years older as he read it, and then, quietly, he admitted something. Debbie hadn't died in 1994. She'd escaped custody. My parents hid her in our basement for nearly 6 months. They told everyone she was dead. Eventually, one night, she vanished. No note, no trace, nothing. And they never saw her again. Until the night I was 9. What happened after that? I asked. My father's face went pale. He stared toward the basement door, and after a long silence, he whispered, "We never opened that laundry room again." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. The room had been permanently sealed behind drywall 2 days later. I went downstairs myself, pulled back old shelving, and there it was, a section of wall newer than the rest, covering what used to be the laundry room entrance. As I stared at it, I noticed something scratched faintly on the paint. 4 words, barely visible, but unmistakable. "Still waiting in here."